October 20, 1944. The American invasion of the Philippines had begun. 130,000 American soldiers were pouring onto Leyte's beaches, backed by the greatest invasion armada ever assembled in the Pacific. 738 vessels of Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's 7th Fleet crowded the waters off Leyte Gulf, while Admiral William Halsey's mighty 3rd Fleet carriers prowled the Philippine Sea like steel predators, their aircraft ready to strike any Japanese force that dared approach. In Tokyo, Admiral Sonyu Toyoda stared at the reports flooding his headquarters. The Americans had begun their landings. After months of preparation, after watching his fleet bleed at the Philippine Sea, after losing hundreds of aircraft over Formosa just days earlier, the moment had arrived. 2 days before the main invasion, Toyoda activated Shoichigo, Victory Operation 1. This wasn't just another battle plan. This was Japan's final gamble, a desperate thrust with every remaining warship to destroy the American invasion fleet. If they failed here, the path to Japan itself would lie open. The plan split Japanese naval power into 3 striking forces, each with a specific role in an intricate dance of deception and destruction. From the inland sea, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa would sail south with Japan's last carriers. Zukaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, alongside light carriers Zuho, Shitos, and Chiyoda. But these carriers were ghosts of their former selves. The air battles off Formosa had consumed their squadrons, leaving barely 100 aircraft with half-trained pilots who could barely land on a carrier deck. Ozawa's mission wasn't victory but sacrifice. Lure Halsey's carriers north, away from Leyte, and die gloriously. Meanwhile, the real striking power would come from the west. Vice Admiral Tekio Kurita commanded the center force, the mailed fist of the Imperial Navy. At its heart sailed Yamato and Musashi, the largest battleships ever built, their 18-inch guns capable of hurling shells the weight of automobiles over 20 miles. With them came battleships Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna, along with 10 cruisers and 15 destroyers. Kurita would thread through the treacherous waters of the Sibuyan Sea, burst through San Bernardino Strait, and descend on Leyte Gulf from the north. From Brunei, Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura led the southern force, battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, heavy cruiser Mogami, and 4 destroyers. They would penetrate Surigao Strait under cover of darkness and strike Leyte from the south. Behind them, Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima's 2nd Striking Force would follow with 3 more cruisers and 4 destroyers. Toyoda knew the plan bordered on suicide. His pilots were barely trained, his ships low on fuel, his commanders sailing without air cover. When asked later about the desperate gamble, he simply said, "If we lost the Philippines, even though the fleet should be saved, the shipping lane to the south would be completely cut off. If the fleet should stay in Japanese waters, it could not obtain fuel. If it should remain in southern waters, it could not receive supplies of ammunition and arms. There would be no sense in saving the fleet at the expense of the Philippines." The storm was gathering. 3 Japanese fleets were converging on Leyte Gulf, where MacArthur's transports lay vulnerable. The largest naval battle in history was about to begin. October 23, 1944. Deep into the night, aboard the submarine U.S. Darter, radar operator Joe Metz stared at his screen in disbelief. What first appeared as a rain squall at the southern entrance to Palawan Passage suddenly resolved into something else entirely. Ship after ship, a massive fleet moving northeast at 16 knots. Commander David McClintock rushed to the radar screen. This wasn't just another convoy. These were warships, capital ships, the heart of the Japanese Navy. At the same moment, 20,000 yards to the north, Commander Bladen Claggett aboard U.S. Dace received Darter's urgent message. Fast ships on northeasterly course. The 2 submarines had been prowling these waters for weeks, part of a submarine picket line guarding the approaches to Leyte. Now, purely by chance, they sat directly in the path of Kurita's center force. 2 American submarines against the might of the Japanese fleet. Through the remaining hours of darkness, Darter tracked the enemy force, sending updates that would prove crucial to the American command. McClintock counted 11 heavy ships in 2 columns, with 6 destroyers screening. But something was wrong with the Japanese formation. No picket destroyers ran ahead of the main force. The fleet moved at only 16 knots through the narrow passage between Palawan Island and the treacherous shoals called the Dangerous Ground. Kurita had made a fatal error, choosing stealth over security. As dawn approached, both submarines submerged and moved into attack position. McClintock and Darter targeted the port column, led by a heavy cruiser, Admiral Kurita's flagship Atago, though he didn't know it at the time. Claggett would take the starboard column. The submarines crept closer, periscopes barely breaking the surface in the pre-dawn darkness. Through his periscope, McClintock could see the massive shapes of Japanese warships, including what looked like battleships in the dim light. Just after first light, with the range down to 980 yards, practically point-blank for a submarine attack, Darter fired 6 torpedoes from her bow tubes. 4 minutes later, explosions ripped through Atago. The flagship lurched, flames shooting from her hull. Within 18 minutes, she rolled over and sank. Admiral Kurita found himself swimming in oil-slicked water as his staff scrambled to escape the sinking cruiser. The destroyer Kishinemi raced in to rescue survivors, pulling the Admiral from the sea like a common sailor. 10 minutes after Darter's attack, Dace launched her spread at the cruiser Maya. Multiple hits tore the ship apart. She went down fast, taking most of her crew with her. Chaos erupted in the Japanese formation. Tako, trying to avoid torpedoes, collided with Darter's second spread and took 2 hits that crippled her. She turned back toward Brunei, barely able to make 5 knots. Destroyers charged about, dropping depth charges at shadows while the heavy ships zigzagged wildly to avoid more torpedoes. In 20 minutes, 2 American submarines had eliminated 3 heavy cruisers from Kurita's order of battle and nearly killed the Admiral himself. But Darter's war would end that night. Pursuing the crippled Tako through the reef-strewn passage without a navigational fix for over 24 hours, she ran hard aground on Bombay Shoal at 17 knots, riding up until her bow stood clear of the water. Despite desperate efforts to free her, she remained stuck. Dace took off her crew before dawn, while Japanese destroyers circled nearby. Multiple attempts to destroy the stranded submarine failed, and her rusted hulk remains on that reef to this day. The contact report from Palawan had already flashed to American headquarters. Halsey now knew exactly where the Japanese were coming from. The battle was joined. Dawn, October 24, 1944. Kurita's battered center force entered the Sibuyan Sea, sailing between the Philippine Islands toward San Bernardino Strait. 10 hours had passed since the submarine attacks. Admiral Kurita now flew his flag from Yamato, the mightiest battleship afloat. Despite losing 3 cruisers in Palawan Passage, his fleet remained formidable. 5 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 13 destroyers. But as the sun climbed higher, American search planes circled like vultures. Shortly after daybreak, a helldiver from U.S. Intrepid found them. The first strike came mid-morning, 45 aircraft from carriers Intrepid and Cabot diving through intense anti-aircraft fire. Japanese gunners filled the sky with steel, even firing their massive 18-inch guns loaded with special shrapnel shells that burst like giant shotgun blasts. But the Americans pressed home their attacks. The super battleship Musashi took the first hit, a torpedo amidships that tore through her hull. Minutes later, bombs struck near her forward turret. She listed 5 degrees to port before damage control teams corrected with counterflooding. Wave after wave followed. Around midday, 29 aircraft from U.S. Essex and Lexington found the fleet. Musashi took 3 more torpedoes on her port side. Water poured through gaping holes in her armor belt, the weakness between upper and lower armor plates that designers had never fully solved. Her bow began settling lower, down 6 feet, then 13. Speed dropped to 22 knots. Admiral Inaguchi Toshihira, Musashi's captain, ordered more counterflooding, but the ship was taking on water faster than pumps could handle. The third strike in early afternoon brought disaster. Helldivers and Avengers from U.S. Enterprise and Franklin bore down through walls of flak. 4 bombs struck Musashi's deck, penetrating deep into her vitals. More torpedoes slammed into both sides of the dying giant. The forward turret's massive guns fell silent, their power cables severed. Electrical systems failed throughout the ship. Survivors would later describe the sight of American pilots flying so close they could see their faces. One Avenger roared between Musashi's pagoda mast and smokestack, its pilot grimly focused despite the hurricane of anti-aircraft fire. By mid-afternoon, after the 4th strike, Musashi could barely make 15 knots. Her list had grown dangerous. The forward deck was awash. Sailors trapped below felt the ship groaning, steel plates buckling under immense water pressure. A 5th strike sealed her fate. More torpedoes, more bombs. One explosion killed everyone on the main bridge, though Captain Inaguchi, by pure chance, had moved to a higher observation post moments before. The mighty warship, built to be unsinkable, was dying. As the afternoon wore on, with Musashi capable of only 6 knots and listing heavily, Kurita made the agonizing decision to leave her behind. He ordered the battleship to reverse course and try for Brunei. But it was too late. Musashi had absorbed 19 torpedo hits and 17 bombs, more punishment than any other battleship had ever taken. Her crew fought desperately to save her, but compartment after compartment flooded. As evening fell and the tropical sun touched the horizon, Musashi rolled to port. Men scrambled up the tilting deck, sliding down the barnacle-encrusted hull into oil-covered water. Captain Inaguchi chose to go down with his command. The ship capsized completely, her massive hull turning turtle before plunging bow first into the depths. Of 2,399 men aboard, 1,023 died with their ship. The survivors, clinging to debris in the darkening sea, watched as Kurita's fleet steamed on without them. Earlier that afternoon, shaken by the loss of Musashi and the relentless air attacks, Kurita had temporarily reversed course. Halsey, receiving reports of this retreat, assumed the center force was finished. He had taken the bait. The real battle was about to begin. While Kurita's battered fleet limped westward in the Sibuyan Sea, Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura steamed toward his doom. The southern force, battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, heavy cruiser Mogami, and 4 destroyers, pushed north through the Mindanao Sea toward Surigao Strait. Nishimura knew he sailed into danger. American PT boats had been shadowing him since dusk. Radio intercepts confirmed the Americans were waiting. But his orders demanded he break through to Leyte Gulf, and Japanese naval tradition left no room for retreat. At the northern mouth of Surigao Strait, Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf had prepared the perfect ambush. His 6 battleships formed a battle line across the strait's exit: West Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania. 5 of them had been resurrected from the mud of Pearl Harbor, their crews hungry for revenge against the Navy that had surprised them 3 years earlier. Oldendorf positioned his cruisers on both flanks, creating a deadly crossfire. 39 PT boats prowled the southern approaches, while destroyer squadrons waited in the darkness to deliver torpedo attacks before the battleships opened fire. The strait itself became a killing ground. Only 15 miles wide at its narrowest point, it channeled Nishimura's ships into a gauntlet where maneuver was impossible. Oldendorf would cross the T, the classic naval tactic where a line of ships fires broadsides at an approaching enemy that can only return fire with forward guns. Every American admiral had studied this maneuver at the Naval War College. None had ever executed it in actual combat. Shortly after midnight, PT boats made contact. They darted through the darkness like angry wasps, launching torpedoes that Nishimura's ships dodged with violent turns. No hits, but the attacks forced the Japanese formation to break apart. In the pre-dawn hours, American destroyers raced down both sides of the strait, weaving between shell splashes as Japanese gunners fired desperately. Commander Richard Phillips led his squadron in so close they could see enemy sailors running on deck. Torpedoes churned through black water. Explosions erupted along Nishimura's line. Fuso took a hit that broke her in half, both sections burning like funeral pyres as they drifted apart. Then came the thunder. West Virginia's radar-directed main battery locked onto Yamashiro at 22,000 yards. As the final approach began, Oldendorf gave the order. 6 battleships opened fire simultaneously, their muzzle flashes lighting the night sky like lightning. Shells weighing up to a ton screamed through the darkness. Yamashiro staggered under the barrage, fires erupting across her superstructure. She took hit after hit, her speed dropping, her formation dissolving. Admiral Nishimura went down with his flagship as she capsized and sank. By dawn, it was over. Only the destroyer Shigure escaped, racing south through the carnage. Mississippi had fired the last salvo, her shells pursuing the fleeing Japanese into the morning light. History's final battleship versus battleship engagement ended at Suriva Strait. The age of the battle wagon died there in those tropical waters, killed by radar-directed fire and perfectly executed tactics. The thunder would never sound again. October 24, late afternoon. Admiral William Halsey stood on the flag bridge of U.S. in New Jersey, wrestling with the decision that would define his career. Reports confirmed Kurita's retreat in the Sibuyan Sea. The mighty Musashi lay at the bottom. The center force had turned tail. Meanwhile, search planes had finally located what Halsey had been hunting for days. Japanese carriers, sailing south off Cape Ingano at the northeastern tip of Luzon. For Halsey, carriers meant one thing, the real threat. His experience at Midway and the Philippine Sea had taught him that carrier aircraft decided modern naval battles. Those flat-tops had to be destroyed. He sent a preliminary battle plan to his task force commanders. Form Task Force 34, the battleships and cruisers, to guard San Bernardino Strait while the carriers triked north. But Halsey never executed the order. He assumed Kurita was finished, no longer capable of threatening the invasion fleet. That evening, he took his entire Third Fleet north. All his carriers, all his battleships, every screening ship. San Bernardino Strait lay unguarded. Ozawa's mission was working perfectly, though he didn't know it yet. The Japanese admiral sailed south with 4 carriers that were little more than empty hulls. Tsukaku, the last survivor of Pearl Harbor's striking force, carried perhaps 30 aircraft. Her sisters Zuho, Chitos, and Chiyoda together held barely 70 more planes, most with pilots so green they struggled with carrier landings. Ozawa's orders were simple. Be seen, be attacked, die if necessary. Draw Halsey away from Leyte Gulf so Kurita could strike. Dawn on October 25 brought American vengeance upon Ozawa's decoys. Wave after wave of Hellcats and Avengers roared off Third Fleet's carriers. The Japanese ships twisted desperately, their few aircraft rising to meet the onslaught in futile gestures of defiance. Tsukaku took bomb after bomb, her flight deck erupting in flames. She capsized and sank by afternoon, taking with her the last tangible link to Japan's glory days. Zuiho lasted until evening before disappearing beneath the waves. Chitos and Chiyoda fell to bombs and torpedoes, abandoned by their screening destroyers as American cruisers closed for the kill. Ozawa transferred his flag twice as carriers burned beneath him. finally ending up on a cruiser, watching his command dissolve. He had succeeded brilliantly at his suicide mission. Halsey had swallowed the bait completely. Then came the message that changed everything. That morning, Admiral Nimitz in Pearl Harbor sent an encrypted query. Where is RPT? Where is Task Force 34RR? The world wonders. The padding phrases meant to confuse enemy code breakers came through as part of the message. Halsey read it as a calculated insult, Pearl Harbor questioning his judgment. He threw his cap to the deck in rage, his face crimson. But the message's intent was clear enough. Where were his battleships? Reports flooded in from the south. Furita had reversed course during the night. At dawn, his battleships had emerged from San Bernardino Strait and fallen upon the escort carriers off Samar. Halsey had left the door wide open. The nightmare he'd been sent to prevent was happening, and he was 300 miles away chasing empty carriers. He ordered Task Force 34 south, but even at flank speed, they would arrive far too late. Dawn, October 25. Ensign William C. Brooks stood watch on the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay when he spotted something impossible on the northwestern horizon. Pagoda masts, the distinctive silhouettes of Japanese battleships. He rubbed his eyes, looked again. They were still there, and getting closer. At 40 miles, Korea's massive fleet bore down on Taffy 3. 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague's voice crackled over the radio. That's not the Third Fleet. That's the Japanese Navy. The escort carriers were built for anti-submarine patrol, not fleet action. Their thin hulls could manage 17 knots. Their 5-inch guns were meant for self-defense against aircraft, not engaging battleships. Yamato alone displaced more than all 6 carriers combined, her 18-inch guns able to reach out 25 miles. Against Sprague stood 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. It should have been a massacre. Sprague turned his carriers east into the wind, launching every aircraft that could fly. Fighters went up armed with depth charges meant for submarines. Bombers carried nothing but propaganda leaflets. It didn't matter. They had to buy time. The carriers fled behind a smoke screen laid by destroyers, while Korea's shells began falling. Colored splashes erupted around the fleeing ships. Different dyes marked each Japanese ship's fall of shot. Red, green, yellow geysers towered over the American vessels. Then came the destroyers. Commander Ernest Evans aboard Johnston didn't wait for orders. He turned his ship directly toward the Japanese fleet and charged. At 25 knots, weaving between shell splashes, Johnston closed to 10,000 yards and opened fire with every gun. Her 5-inch shells sparked against cruiser Kumano's superstructure. Evans launched 10 torpedoes, one blowing off Kumano's bow and sending her limping out of formation. Japanese battleships shifted fire to this impudent destroyer. Shells tore through Johnston's bridge, severing Evans's fingers and shredding his body with shrapnel. He refused to leave his post. Hull followed Johnston's charge, engaging multiple battleships simultaneously. Her captain, Commander Leon Kintberger, aimed for Congo, firing over 400 rounds while dodging salvos from 3 directions. A 14-inch shell finally found her engine room. Dead in the water, she took 40 hits before rolling over. Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort 1/3 the size of a destroyer, earned immortality that morning. Her crew called her the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. And she lived up to it. Commander Robert Copeland drove her into point-blank range of heavy cruiser Chikuma, firing 600 rounds in a furious hour-long duel. When her ammunition ran out, her crew resorted to star shells. Illumination rounds never meant for surface combat. A cruiser shell finally penetrated her thin hull, detonating the aft magazine. She went down fighting. The American pilots made run after run, dropping whatever ordnance they carried, then making dry runs with empty bomb bays to distract Japanese gunners. Some flew so low their wheels nearly touched Japanese masts. Airmen weaved between her carriers like a sheepdog, trading salvos with cruisers 10 times her weight. As the morning wore on, with Gambier Bay sinking and victory within his grasp, Kurita ordered a general withdrawal. His staff stared in disbelief. The American carriers lay helpless ahead, transports visible beyond. But Kurita had lost his nerve. The ferocious resistance convinced him he faced Halsey's fleet carriers, not escort carriers. He turned north, then west, and fled back through San Bernardino Strait. As the Japanese ships disappeared, Lieutenant Yukio Seki dove his Zero into the escort carrier Street Low. The kamikaze age had begun. The carrier exploded in a tower of flame, the first victim of Japan's final, desperate weapon. The battle ended, but the dying continued. Hundreds of American sailors floated in oil-slicked water off Samar, clinging to life rafts and debris. Men from Johnston, Hull, Samuel B. Roberts, and Gambier Bay waited for rescue that wouldn't come quickly. The remaining escort carriers had scattered, damage control parties fighting fires and flooding. The few destroyers left operational searched for survivors, but the ocean was vast and the men were scattered across miles of churning sea. Commander Ernest Evans was last seen on Johnston's stern as she rolled over, refusing evacuation, his mangled hand still gripping the railing. The destroyer captain who had charged alone against battleships went down with his ship. Nearby, the Japanese destroyer captain stood at attention on his bridge and saluted as the American vessel slipped beneath the waves, one warrior honoring another. The oil was the worst part. Thick bunker fuel coated everything, burning throats, blinding eyes, making every breath an ordeal. Men vomited the black sludge, weakening from exposure and dehydration. When the sharks came, exhausted sailors could only watch helplessly as fins circled closer. Some men simply gave up, letting go of their rafts and sinking without a word. Others held on for 2 days before rescue ships finally arrived, guided by pilots who marked positions with smoke floats. Of Johnston's crew of 327, only 141 survived. Hull lost 253 men of 330. Samuel B. Roberts saw 89 die from her complement of 224. Admiral Sprague sat in his cabin afterward, still shaking. He had faced annihilation and somehow survived. When asked later how Taffy 3 escaped, he said simply, "I can only think that it was divine help." His counterpart Kurita would spend the rest of his life defending his decision to withdraw. He claimed confusion, low fuel, the belief that he faced fleet carriers rather than escort carriers. Critics argued he had victory within his grasp and threw it away. The truth likely lay somewhere between. A man exhausted by 3 days of relentless air attacks, who had lost his flagship and nearly drowned, who saw his mighty Musashi destroyed, making a decision in the fog of war that saved the American invasion fleet. The butcher's bill for Leyte Gulf told the story of Japanese naval power's final dissolution. 3 battleships sank: Musashi, Yamashiro, Fuso. 4 carriers went down: Tsukaku, Zuho, Chitos, Chiyoda. 10 cruisers were lost. 9 destroyers destroyed. The Imperial Japanese Navy ceased to exist as an offensive force. What remained would never sortie again, except for Yamato's final suicide run to Okinawa 6 months later. The Americans lost 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort. The cost in lives was severe, nearly 3,000 dead, but the strategic victory was complete. MacArthur's transports remained untouched. The Philippine campaign would continue. The path to Japan lay open. In 4 days of fighting across 500 miles of ocean, the largest naval battle in history had decided the Pacific War's outcome. The thunder of naval guns had spoken for the last time. Leyte Gulf remains the largest naval battle in history, Over 200,000 sailors fought across an area larger than Texas, from the submarine ambush at Palawan to the carrier strikes off Cape Engano. The battle showcased every dimension of naval warfare: submarines, aircraft, surface guns, and the first organized kamikaze attacks. The command decisions still spark debate. Halsey's aggressive pursuit of carriers versus Kurita's cautious withdrawal. Oldendorf's textbook execution at Surigao versus Nishimura's doomed charge. But above all stands Taffy 3's impossible stand. Ordinary sailors in thin-skinned ships who faced battleships and refused to run. Admiral Nimitz later called their survival the kind of special dispensation from the Lord Almighty. Historians rank it among warfare's greatest last stands. After Leyte Gulf, the age of naval battles ended. The thunder would echo only in memory. Thanks for watching.